I became PMCT president in 1994, and that was after many years serving on the executive board, roughly about 10 years as vice president, when Tony Canetta was president. And I had several other positions prior to that. And those years when Tony was president, we had a very successful union, and we did a lot of good stuff. Unfortunately, when I became president, things changed. And I was only president for 2 years, but it was a very packed 2 years of activity and problems and fights and et cetera. Because what happened was that the budget was increased by almost the school budget was increased by almost 30% in 1994 because of some problems the previous years where they didn't make the right decisions about how to set up the budget. And this created a organization in Patchogue called CTOP that was looking to cut taxes, was very anti-teacher, and they took over the school board during my presidency. And so we ended up having several major issues, but there were two that were most important. One was that our contract had expired, and we were trying to negotiate a successor contract, and it was very difficult to do with an anti-teacher, tax-packed Board of Education. And the second issue was a very specific issue related to that, and that was the fight over tenure. The tenure issue was a very specific kind of issue. And so as a result of that, we had to do a whole bunch of different things than we had done in the past. I was involved in trying to lead the organization to deal with both these issues. And so the tenure issue was successful. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we ultimately won that battle. The negotiation for contract was much more difficult, and the long-term battle of getting the CTOP people and the anti-teacher, anti-tax people off the board went well beyond my presidency. But we did start the fight quite early in doing a whole bunch of standard kinds of things where we were picketing before school started. We did a bunch of marches in the community to show our position. We went to school board meetings, and so those are kinds of things that had been done in the past by unions, and the PMCT had done some of that in the past as well. But it escalated with the CTOP people on controlling the Board of Education. So we had to do those kinds of activities, and we continued those throughout the 2 years that I was president. Some of them were very heated kinds of things that occurred. Others went smoothly, but the membership was very good. Membership supported, came out, did the picketing in the mornings, if necessary, came to board meetings, etc. And I think one of the things that helped do that was the tenure battle. And so the tenure battle was based on 2 teachers being denied tenure, even though they are recommended by the superintendent, had very positive write-ups in terms of all of their teaching, but they were denied tenure simply because the CTOP board members, and I think particularly one board member, felt that this was something that should be done, and it was related to the anti-tax issue, because their argument was that granting tenure makes it possible for people to last forever in the school district, and therefore the way the school system pays, it's just going to be more and more expensive to have teachers who are going to be teaching for 20, 30 years. So we fought that battle legally. We had a very good attorney, Dan Gallinson, who was the attorney that we had hired. I think he may have been the attorney for maybe as long as 15 years, maybe longer. So we were very familiar with his abilities, and we turned to him, and he filed suit to protect our teachers, and we had the support of the state teachers union as well, the NICET. And as a result of that, there was the legal battle part, but we also ended up focusing on the Board of Education and by going to board meetings, by picketing before board meetings, etc. And so for a while, the focus in terms of activity wasn't so much on the trying to get a contract negotiation going, but instead was more focused on protecting these two teachers and the whole possibility that the tenure system could be defeated. And we certainly wanted to make sure that didn't happen, particularly for these two teachers, but for the issue in general. So that ultimately became successful because we won the battle in court. We ended up going to court basically twice, and in both times the judge made it quite clear that these teachers could not be denied tenure simply because the school board was opposed to the concept of tenure. That just couldn't be done. So as a result, they eventually were granted tenure. One of them left the school district and went someplace else. But the other one, I believe, is still teaching in the school district, if I'm not mistaken. So that was a successful battle. But in terms of all of that activity going on, one of the things that I recognized was that the union as a union had to do things differently. And one of the things that the executive board did differently was, instead of meeting twice a week, we ended up meeting every week for hours at a time because we had so many things to discuss and plan, etc. But we also realized that we needed to do things differently, but we weren't sure what they were. And as it turns out, because some of the issues we were dealing with were issues that were percolating, particularly the anti-tax groups in other school districts as well throughout the state. And so NICET decided to develop a program to assist local unions to work within their school district to become much more active and be much more successful in terms of changing this anti-tax, this anti-teacher concept, and become more proactive. So we were invited because the NICET knew that we were having major problems. So we were invited to go to a special workshop. I can't remember, it was 3 days, I think. Maybe it was 4 days, I'm not sure, upstate. It was our local and a couple of other locals were invited. And I asked for volunteers from the executive board, and I believe it was 5 of us ended up going upstate. 5 members of the executive board were willing to give up several days of their summer vacation in order to attend and go to workshops, plan on doing things differently, and come up with alternative things that the union could be doing. And that ultimately became, I think, very successful. Not so much while I was president, because it was a long process, but certainly when Jane Canetta took over from me, the executive board was quite successful in coming up with a whole bunch of different activities that are now become a major part of what the union is all about. And we ultimately were successful in getting rid of the tax-backed people on the board and getting the community to be more supportive. And many of those activities that generated out of this continue and still continue today. And I think they've done some new things, other things that weren't done immediately, et cetera. So the union has become much more active within the community, as well as within the school district, but within the community as well. And as a result, I think they've been quite successful most of the time. We ended up having a decent contract, finally negotiated, and from that point on, the various presidents that many of these things I think developed during Jane Canetta's presidency, and then it was up to Andy and Paul and Beth to continue those in the succeeding years. So I think Kevin's still doing them. So it's going. So I think it was 2 years of a lot of work for me, for the members on the executive board, and they were very supportive, and we tried a whole bunch of new things, new ways of doing things. Ultimately, it was frustrating when I left, and I left, by the way, because the school board accepted the early retirement incentive that the state put in, and so as a result of that, I was able to leave early, retire early, and I left, and so I was only president for 2 years. But part of why I was willing to do that is I knew Jane Canetta, who'd been involved in the union for all those many, actually more years than I was, and was my vice president. I knew that she would do a wonderful job in dealing with all these issues. So I knew that I wasn't leaving the organization with no possibility of success in the future.